In a universe where faster-than-light travel was invented before decent coffee, approximately 17,000 species had managed to crawl, slither, or pompously stride their way into what they called galactic civilization. Quite the misnomer, really, considering how spectacularly uncivilized the whole arrangement was. My species, the Viridians, had the misfortune of evolving on a planet circling a rather temperamental star in the Cygnus arm. We developed spaceflight late in the game, around the time most species were already arguing about proper etiquette when mind-melding at diplomatic functions. Fashionably late to the cosmic party, as it were. Our biology isn't particularly impressive. Bipedal, chlorophyll-enhanced humanoids with natural photosynthetic abilities. Yes, we're basically walking plants with opinions. Very advanced opinions, mind you, considering we'd managed to develop quantum computing before we figured out how not to wilt in low humidity. All was relatively fine in our photosynthetic paradise until our astronomers, a nervy bunch who spent too much time staring at stars and not enough time enjoying them, noticed something rather inconvenient. Our sun had developed what you might call cosmic indigestion, a rare stellar phenomenon causing radiation fluctuations that would in approximately 6 standard galactic months render our entire planet uninhabitable for plant-based life, which unfortunately described about 98% of all life on Viridia. Now you'd think in a galaxy teeming with 17,000 species, at least a few would be willing to lend a helping appendage. After all, isn't that what advanced civilization implies? Some basic level of compassion beyond one's exoskeleton? Apparently not. The Galactic Cooperation Council, an organization whose name contains 2 blatant falsehoods, convened an emergency session to discuss our plight. The axiom hierarchy, masters of theoretical physics and practical indifference, suggested we evolve faster. The Mycloid Consortium calculated the resource expenditure of evacuation and found it economically non-viable. The Zentari Collective, self-proclaimed paragons of spiritual enlightenment, offered to preserve our essence in their psychic memory banks after we expired. How thoughtful. Even the Phloxian Empire, with their surplus of habitable moons and self-congratulatory philanthropy programs, declined assistance, citing incompatible biospheric requirements, as if they couldn't spare one measly moon for a few billion refugees. It seemed that advanced technology and advanced ethics weren't necessarily a package deal in this galaxy. As our diplomatic envoys returned with rejection after rejection, our civilization began preparing for the end, composing our final cultural transmissions, preserving genetic samples, and drinking far too much fermented nectar. Then we detected an unregistered vessel approaching from an unexplored sector of space. A species so new to interstellar travel, they hadn't even formally joined the Council registry. Humans, they called themselves. And unlike the 17,000 advanced species that came before them, they asked the one question no one else had bothered with: have you tried asking for help? Our sun, unimaginatively named Verid by our ancestors, had decided to spend its middle age having what stellar physicists call coronal restructuring events. For non-astrophysicists and those who prefer their existential threats in plain language, our star was belching out massive waves of hypercharged particles that were gradually stripping away our atmospheric radiation shield. Think of it as cosmic acid reflux, except instead of heartburn, we got extinction. The Viridian High Science Council, 12 brilliantly photosynthetic minds in ceremonial robes that frankly made them look like overgrown houseplants, had calculated that within 6 months, the radiation levels would reach what they clinically termed biologically incompatible thresholds. Translation: we'd all shrivel up like forgotten produce in the back of a refrigerator. Could we build protective shields? Asked the military, whose solution to everything involved some form of barrier or projectile. Not with our current technology, replied the scientists. We'd need to cover an entire planet, and our energy production capabilities are insufficient by several orders of magnitude. Could we all move underground? Suggested the pragmatists, a species that requires photosynthesis living in darkness. Brilliant plan, the scientists retorted. We'd starve within weeks. Our technology, while respectable enough to achieve spaceflight and quantum computing, had one critical shortcoming. We'd focused our development on sustainable bio-integration, rather than heavy industrial capacity. We could grow magnificent living cities, and create computers from crystalline biological matrices, but we couldn't mass-produce the kind of massive spacecraft needed to evacuate billions of people. Our few interstellar vessels were research craft, designed to carry dozens, not millions. And so with diplomatic envoys and quantum-encrypted distress signals, we turn to the galactic community. The Doraxian meritocracy, silicon-based entities who prided themselves on logical superiority, received our ambassadors in their crystalline chambers on Dorax Prime. Their high logical executor listened to our plea with what appeared to be interest, their faceted eyes reflecting our desperate gestures. "Your situation is indeed unfortunate," they concluded after precisely 3 minutes of deliberation. "However, our logical matrices indicate that diverting resources to your evacuation would delay our Transcendence project by 4.3 years. The needs of evolving consciousness must take precedence over biological continuation. We wish you a dignified extinction." The hive fleet of Jex-2 organic spacecraft, pilots with supposedly enlightened collective consciousness, were even less diplomatic. "Your species' genetic structure lacks sufficient novelty to warrant preservation," their overmind transmitted. "We have catalogued your biological patterns. Your physical existence is now redundant." The empathic conclave of Misistara, telepathic gasbags who constantly projected emotional platitudes, offered perhaps the most insulting response. "We feel your suffering most deeply," they pulsated, their translator units struggling to convey the appropriate tone of synthetic concern. "We shall broadcast empathic resonance waves in your direction during your final days, ensuring your collective consciousness experiences tranquility as it dissipates." They followed this with an automated donation linked to their Cultural Memory Preservation Fund. The Mechanoid Directorate of Praxis 6 simply calculated the cost-benefit ratio of intervention and responded with a single-character message that translated roughly as uneconomical. Even the aquatic harmony of Blues, whose ancestral mythology specifically venerated acts of rescue, declined assistance because plant-based refugees might contaminate our water purification ecosystems. With each diplomatic failure, our scientists grew more desperate, our political leaders more resigned, and our population more terrified. Public spaces once filled with the soft murmur of photosynthesis now resonated with the quiet rustle of fear. Our final hope came from the unified technocracy of Meldor, biomechanical hybrids known for their engineering prowess. Their response at least acknowledged reality. "Your problem requires resources beyond what any single civilization would willingly provide. Your extinction, while regrettable, is statistically inevitable." How comforting to be a statistical inevitability. The unregistered vessel that approached our planet was by galactic standards a joke with engines. The humans called it the Curiosity 2, though any self-respecting spacecraft engineer would have named it probable structural failure, or perhaps imminent decompression event. It was cobbled together from what appeared to be repurposed mining equipment, outdated propulsion systems, and most bafflingly decorative external lighting that served no functional purpose whatsoever. Our orbital defense grid, primarily designed to track meteoroids rather than repel invaders, detected their approach. The Planetary Security Council convened an emergency session, which mostly consisted of bureaucrats frantically leafing through first contact protocols that hadn't been updated since we discovered microbes on our fourth moon. "Unidentified vessel," our communications officer transmitted. "You are entering Viridian sovereign space. Please identify your species, origin and purpose." "Hey there, we're humans from Earth," came the surprisingly casual response. "We picked up your distress signals. Sounds like you folks are in a bit of trouble with your son." The diplomatic corps nearly had a collective wilting fit at this breach of formal contact protocols. No proper identification codes, no ceremonial language, not even the customary exchange of mathematical sequences to establish intelligence baselines. Just, "Hey there." The humans requested permission to land, which sparked another 3 hours of bureaucratic debate. Eventually pragmatism prevailed over protocol. When facing extinction, one can afford to be a bit lax with the paperwork. Their landing party consisted of 5 humans, 3 females and 2 males, though telling them apart required careful observation of secondary characteristics, since they all wore similar practical garments, rather than status-indicating attire. Most peculiarly, they carried no ceremonial objects or status symbols, just an assortment of what appeared to be working tools and scanning devices. Our greeting committee, 22 officials in full ceremonial foliage, met them at the designated first contact site. Chief Diplomatic Coordinator Thal Vaughan began the traditional 40-minute greeting of new species, complete with ritualized light pattern displays from our photosynthetic crown leaves. The humans watched this elaborate display for approximately 3 minutes before one of them, a female with head fur colored like our autumn foliage, stepped forward with a device in hand. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "Not sounding particularly sorry, but our atmospheric analyzers show your radiation levels are already at concerning thresholds. Maybe we could skip ahead to the part where we discuss your solar problem." The audible rustling of offended foliage from our diplomatic corps could have been heard from orbit. The humans were escorted to our planetary science center, where our greatest minds explained our predicament in exquisite technical detail. The presentation included 143 slides of spectral analyses, radiation projections, and population distribution maps. The humans listened intently, occasionally interrupting with questions that revealed both their technological limitations and their surprising intuitive grasp of the problem. They didn't understand quantum resonance theory or photosynthetic optimization, but they immediately grasped the practical implications. So basically, summarized one of the males, who had introduced himself as Dr. Kapoor, "Your sun is killing your atmosphere. You need to either fix it or evacuate, and nobody else will help because they're all self-important jerks." Our chief scientist's leaf crest turned a pale yellow of shock at this oversimplification, but she couldn't exactly dispute its accuracy. The humans huddled together, speaking rapidly in their native language, while gesturing at our data displays. Then they asked for something no other species had requested: a tour of our regular cities where normal people lived. While our officials debated the propriety of such a request, the lead human, Captain Reed, approached me specifically. As the designated historical chronicler for first contact events, I was supposed to remain unobtrusive, but she somehow noticed me recording in the corner. "Your leaders and scientists are impressive," she said quietly, "but we need to see how your everyday people live, to understand what solutions might actually work for your civilization." When I asked why other species hadn't requested such information, she laughed. "Most spacefaring civilizations forget that solutions aren't implemented by governments or theories. They're implemented by ordinary people." Despite considerable reluctance from the officials, the humans' request was granted, though only after they agreed to wear tracking devices and be accompanied by security personnel who looked about as threatening as ornamental shrubs can look. What followed was perhaps the most unusual first contact scenario in recorded galactic history. Instead of studying our technology or resources, the humans were fascinated by our agriculture, our water management systems, our public transportation, and most peculiarly our artistic expressions. They spoke not just to scientists and officials, but to farmers, engineers, artists and even children, and they took notes, endless notes. "These aliens," whispered one council member to another, "are either the most thorough anthropologists in the galaxy, or they're planning the most well-researched invasion ever conducted." Neither possibility prepared us for what they actually proposed. After 3 days of investigation, during which they consumed alarming quantities of our fruit nectars, and asked questions that made our experts question their intelligence, the humans called for a joint session with our High Council Science Directorate and Public Resource Administrators. "We've got 3 possible approaches," announced Captain Reed, standing before our most revered leaders, with the casual stance of someone discussing dinner options rather than planetary salvation. "None of them are perfect, but perfection isn't on the menu when you're facing extinction." Our council members rustled nervously. In Viridian culture, one presented only fully formed perfect solutions to authority. These humans clearly hadn't read our proper procedural protocols for presentations to persons of prominence. Dr. Kapoor activated a surprisingly primitive holographic display. Option 1. Atmospheric reinforcement, using a network of orbital reflectors combined with ionization generators. Our chief scientist's foliage brightened with recognition. "We considered this approach but determined we lack sufficient materials and manufacturing capacity." "Yeah, that's why we contacted our friends," replied Dr. Martinez, the astronavigation specialist. "The Keldarians in the next sector over have the materials." The council exchanged confused glances. The Keldarian Technarchy explicitly denied our request for assistance, stated Council Leader Philetus. Captain Reed smiled. "They denied your formal diplomatic request as a planetary government. They didn't deny our private trade offer as independent operators." "Big difference." "You traded with them? Without authorization? Without diplomatic credentials?" Our regulatory compliance officer looked ready to photosynthesize himself into a coma. "We offered them something they wanted," shrugged Lieutenant Chen, their engineering specialist. "Turns out humans make really good coffee, and Keldarian administrators are addicted to caffeine." £20 of premium Sumatra beans bought us access to their surplus orbital reflector components. The council was scandalized. The idea of circumventing proper diplomatic channels through informal commerce was practically heretical. Option 2, continued Dr. Kapoor, seemingly oblivious to the bureaucratic meltdown he'd triggered, is partial population relocation combined with underground farming, using specialized light emitters that match your photosynthetic spectrum. This concept came from Lieutenant Okafor, their agricultural specialist, who had spent days studying our farming techniques. She'd noticed something our own agricultural scientists had overlooked. Our photosynthesis was remarkably efficient at specific light wavelengths, requiring only 30% of full-spectrum sunlight if delivered at the optimal frequency. We couldn't possibly build enough underground facilities in 6 months, objected our infrastructure minister. Not with that attitude, muttered Lieutenant Chen, before adding more diplomatically. Not with conventional construction methods, no, but we don't need to build new structures. Your ancient mineral extraction networks. The forbidden tunnels, gasped several council members simultaneously. Apparently, centuries ago we had abandoned subterranean mining due to religious taboos about disturbing the roots of the world. The tunnels had been sealed and deemed culturally off-limits, a fact that impressed the humans about as much as our ceremonial greeting rituals had. They're structurally sound, already excavated, and conveniently located near population centers, Lieutenant Chen pointed out. With minimal retrofitting and the installation of specialized lighting, they could support approximately 40% of your population. Religious leaders were already vibrating with objection when Captain Reed unveiled Option 3, which caused even more consternation. A fleet of evacuation ships constructed from repurposed orbital habitats and industrial platforms. We can't possibly build enough ships in time, protested the industrial coordinator. Not using your current manufacturing paradigms, agreed Dr. Wong, their systems specialist. But you don't need to build traditional ships. Your orbital solar collection arrays can be repurposed into emergency evacuation platforms with minimal modification. The debate raged for hours. The human solutions violated dozens of cultural taboos, regulatory frameworks, and established scientific paradigms. They mixed technologies that weren't meant to be combined, suggested alliances with species we traditionally avoided, and proposed the wholesale redesignation of sacred sites. When the council finally called for a recess, I found Captain Reed in our botanical relaxation garden, examining a flowering quartz crystal with fascination. Your leaders are struggling with our proposals, she observed without looking up. Your solutions violate many of our most cherished principles, I explained. Principles are luxury items during an extinction event, she replied, finally meeting my gaze. Here's something we've learned through our own history. Survival often requires uncomfortable choices. After the recess, Council Leader Photos asked the question that had been rustling through everyone's foliage. Why are you helping us when 17,000 more advanced civilizations refused? The humans exchanged glances before Dr. Kapoor answered. About 300 years ago, our planet faced a climate catastrophe of our own making. We nearly didn't survive it. We swore if we ever encountered another species facing extinction, we wouldn't just stand by and watch. But surely the advanced principles of galactic civilization, began the ethics minister. With respect, interrupted Captain Reed. Any civilization that watches another die when they could help, isn't particularly civilized, regardless of how advanced their technology might be. The following weeks were a study in chaos, improvisation, and cultural whiplash. Humans and Viridians worked side by side, often arguing, occasionally achieving breakthroughs, and frequently baffling one another. Dr. Martinez and our astronomers redesigned our orbital platforms, overcoming incompatible technical standards through what the humans called aggressive engineering adaptation, and what we called terrifying improvisation. Lieutenant Okafor scandalized our agricultural authorities by personally descending into the forbidden tunnels with portable lights, emerging 3 days later with thriving plant samples and a detailed cultivation plan. Lieutenant Chen somehow convinced our most conservative engineers to repurpose sacred ceremonial crystals as power conduits, demonstrating their effectiveness by building a prototype that produced twice the output of our standard generators. Wong upended our information systems, creating a planet-wide coordination network that bypassed traditional hierarchical approval processes, causing several regulatory officials to resign in protest, even as it dramatically accelerated implementation. And Captain Reed, perhaps most remarkably, appeared on our public information broadcasts, explaining the crisis and solutions directly to the populace. The unprecedented transparency triggered a wave of public involvement that overwhelmed our carefully structured social systems, but mobilized resources our government hadn't known existed. "Your people are amazing when you get out of their way," she told me as we watched thousands of volunteers converting an abandoned temple into an evacuation coordination center. "This violates every cultural norm we have," I observed. "Cultural norms are wonderful things," she replied, "until they become cultural shackles." Implementation day arrived with all the calm and serenity of a quantum reactor meltdown. The three-pronged plan, dubbed Operation Photosynthesis by the humans, who apparently couldn't resist naming everything, launched simultaneously across our world. In orbit, the first reflector arrays deployed with what the humans called minimal complications, and what our engineers called catastrophic deviations from design specifications. 3 arrays failed to unfold properly. 1 deployed upside down, a truly impressive feat in zero gravity, and another mysteriously began broadcasting what Lieutenant Chen identified as early 21st century human dance music. "Is the musical transmission part of the radiation deflection process?" inquired our chief engineer, desperately trying to maintain professional dignity. "No, that's just Jenkins being an idiot," Captain Reed replied, before barking orders into her communication device. The music stopped, though occasional beats still pulsed through the emergency channel. Below ground, the conversion of the forbidden tunnels progressed with slightly more decorum, though not without incident. The religious council insisted on performing purification rituals before each section could be modified, which involved hours of ceremonial chanting and the burning of aromatic resins that, as it happened, interfered with the humans' atmospheric testing equipment. "Can't you just speed up the chanting?" Lieutenant Okafor asked one high priest, who responded with such horrified leaf-wilting that 3 acolytes had to assist him to a sunning chamber to recover. The evacuation fleet construction faced the greatest challenges. Our orbital manufacturing facilities had never attempted to produce anything remotely approaching the scale of the emergency transports. When the first habitat frame buckled during assembly, our project managers called an immediate halt pending a full investigation, standard procedure expected to take approximately 2 months. Wong stared at them for approximately 4 seconds before implementing what she called Plan B, which involved bypassing the management chain entirely, and working directly with the construction crews to implement real-time design modifications. "You can't just change structural specifications during construction," protested the regulatory compliance officer. "Watch me," replied Dr. Wong, already recalculating load distributions on her tablet. Word of our unconventional salvation attempt spread through galactic channels, triggering reactions ranging from bemusement to outrage. The Duraxian meritocracy sent a formal protest accusing humans of recklessly interfering with natural species succession. The Aquatic Harmony of Bluus released a statement expressing deep concern about cross-species contamination of problem-solving methodologies. Most telling, perhaps, was the sudden arrival of observer vessels from 12 previously uninterested civilizations, hovering just outside our system's boundary to monitor the proceedings. None offered assistance, but all requested comprehensive data sharing about the methods being employed. The Galactic Cooperation Council convened a special session to discuss what they termed the human aberration in standardized crisis management protocols. Their conclusion, transmitted galaxy-wide, stated that while they acknowledged the creative approach being attempted, they could not endorse methodologies that circumvented established intervention hierarchies. Captain Reed's response, when I showed her the transmission, cannot be reproduced in formal historical records. 3 months into implementation, our solar radiation levels reached what had been calculated as the critical survival threshold. According to all predictive models, widespread crop failure and ecosystem collapse should have begun. Instead, the orbital reflector network, now properly aligned and mercifully silent, reduced surface radiation by 63%, enough to maintain basic agricultural production. The underground facilities, completed weeks ahead of schedule, thanks to an unprecedented cooperative effort between religious authorities and technical experts, now housed nearly 30% of our population on rotating shifts. And the evacuation fleet, while smaller than initially planned, stood ready to transport our most vulnerable populations if conditions worsened. We had achieved the impossible, a functional, if imperfect, three-layered defense against extinction. As I documented these developments, I found myself increasingly assigned to human companions rather than Viridian officials. My traditional role as objective chronicler had been compromised by what my supervisors called excessive integration with external methodologies, a bureaucratic way of saying I'd gone native with the humans. I didn't bother correcting this perception, particularly as it afforded me greater access to their unfiltered opinions. Your civilization's biggest problem isn't technological, Dr. Kapoor told me during a rare quiet moment as we watched the sunset through the diffuse glow of the orbital shield. It's imagination. We're highly creative. I objected. Our artistic traditions. Not artistic imagination, he clarified. Emergency imagination. The ability to see beyond established patterns when survival depends on it. Lieutenant Chen, overhearing, added her perspective while calibrating a portable shield generator. When you've only ever had one way of doing things, you think that's the only way they can be done. Humans tried to kill ourselves off so many times that we got really good at improvising new ways to survive. The ultimate test came when our star, apparently irritated by our refusal to politely die, produced a coronal mass ejection 3 times larger than any previously recorded. The radiation surge overwhelmed 4 reflector arrays and damaged 2 evacuation vessels. The disaster response unfolded, not according to any predetermined plan, but through rapid, almost instinctive adaptation. Captain Reed coordinated from orbit. Dr. Wong reconfigured the planetary network to prioritize affected areas, and Lieutenant Chen jury-rigged replacement reflectors from maintenance platforms never designed for such use. When the emergency subsided, I found myself standing with Captain Reed in our central operations facility, surrounded by exhausted Viridians and humans, who had worked without rest for 3 consecutive days. How did you know what to do? I asked her. There was no protocol for that situation. She smiled tiredly. Humans don't trust protocols. We trust people. I looked around at the improbable collaboration that had saved my species, and finally understood the most powerful human technology, their relentless refusal to accept failure as an option. One standard galactic year after the arrival of the Curiosity 2, Viridia had transformed from a doomed footnote in xenobiological history to what galactic news feeds now uncomfortably termed an evolutionary outlier. Our continued existence was considered, in certain academic circles, to be something of a statistical embarrassment. The orbital reflector network, now a permanent fixture in our sky, had stabilized into a sustainable defensive grid, reducing harmful radiation to manageable levels, while allowing sufficient light for surface photosynthesis. Our formerly sacred underground caverns housed thriving agricultural complexes producing specialized crops that, ironically, now commanded premium prices in interstellar markets. The emergency evacuation fleet had been repurposed into a modest but functional interstellar trade flotilla. Most remarkably, 17 human vessels now orbited our world, a fledgling embassy trading post/station that represented Earth's first official extraplanetary diplomatic mission. Captain Reed had been promoted to Ambassador Reed, though she still preferred her captain's uniform to formal diplomatic attire. Less itchy, she explained when I inquired. The Galactic Cooperation Council, after months of bureaucratic contortions that would impress even the most flexible invertebrate species, finally issued their official position on the Viridian situation. The 14,000-page document could be summarized in a single sentence. While unorthodox methods were employed, the preservation of sapient lifeforms is consistent with Council principles. How magnanimous of them to retroactively approve our refusal to conveniently die. More telling were the private diplomatic overtures. The Diraxian meritocracy suddenly discovered logical value in cultural exchange programs. The Macloid Consortium proposed mutually beneficial trade agreements. Even the Floxian Empire sent a delegation offering developmental partnership opportunities. All of them coincidentally requested extensive access to human representatives. They're not interested in us, I observed to Ambassador Reed, during a particularly tedious diplomatic reception. They're interested in you. Of course they are, she replied, casually violating 3 different diplomatic protocols, by eating the decorative garnish from her plate. We're confusing, unpredictable and successful, the 3 things bureaucratic power structures fear most. The humans' approach to problem-solving had revealed an uncomfortable truth about galactic civilization. For all its technological advancement, it had become culturally stagnant, bound by processes and protocols that valued stability over adaptability. The humans, with their chaotic improvised solutions, and their frustrating habit of achieving the impossible, represented an evolutionary path most advanced species had abandoned millennia ago. My official chronicle of the Viridian survival event became required reading at the Galactic Diplomatic Academy, though I suspect it was taught as a cautionary tale rather than an inspirational one. I received 17 offers to serve as cultural attaché to various powerful civilizations, all of which I declined in favor of my new role as liaison to the human embassy. During our regular cultural exchange sessions, which the humans insisted on calling happy hour, despite the variable duration and frequent absence of happiness, I asked Dr. Kapoor why humanity had developed so differently from other spacefaring species. Most advanced civilizations solve problems until they run out of existential threats, he theorized, sipping the fermented fruit beverage our biochemists had created for human consumption. Then they focus on optimization rather than innovation. We never got that luxury. Every time we solved one crisis, we created two more. That sounds inefficient, I noted. Extremely, agreed Lieutenant Chen. But it kept our problem-solving muscles in shape. The most profound change, perhaps, was within Viridian culture itself. The rigid hierarchies and meticulous protocols that had defined our civilization for millennia began giving way to more flexible, adaptive systems. Not without resistance. The traditional Methodologies Preservation Society still held weekly protests outside the new Human Cultural Center. But inevitably, as Ambassador Reed put it, once you've seen that the old ways can fail and new ways can succeed, you can't unsee it. 6 months after the crisis officially ended, the Galactic Cooperation Council convened a special symposium on interspecies crisis management protocols, formally inviting human representatives for the first time. Ambassador Reed asked me to accompany her as cultural interpreter. The council chamber buzzed with representatives from 200 of the most technologically advanced species in known space. Quantum computers processed data in real time. Telepathic enhancement fields facilitated instantaneous communication. Matter manipulation technologies provided perfect environmental conditions for each delegation. After 17 mind-numbing hours of procedural discussions about forming committees to evaluate potential frameworks for considering crisis response modifications, Ambassador Reed was finally granted the floor. Her entire presentation consisted of a single image, a Viridian child, and a human child planting seedlings together in one of our reclaimed surface gardens. Advanced civilization isn't measured by how well you follow procedures, she told the assembly. It's measured by whether you're willing to get your hands dirty to help someone else survive. As the chamber erupted into shocked murmurs and procedural objections, I couldn't help but appreciate the beautiful irony. The supposedly primitive species teaching the advanced ones the most advanced concept of all, that real progress happens not through perfecting processes, but through imperfect compassion. Perhaps being advanced isn't about how elegantly you can theorize about the universe, but how stubbornly you refuse to let it die.